Story 1. Samuel Clark Gallimore was born on February 15, 1971, in Texas. He was a white male. His family lived in a rural part of the state. Samuel had an older brother. His older brother joined a gang when they were both young. Samuel often got into fights to protect his older brother from other people. This happened many times while Samuel was growing up. Samuel started using drugs when he was only 5 years old. He began with marijuana. His parents did not stop him from using drugs. As he got older, he continued to use marijuana and other drugs. He did not do well in school. He dropped out of school as a teenager. He never finished his high school education. After leaving school, Samuel did not have a steady job. He stayed in Texas. He kept using drugs. He also started getting into trouble with the police. On October 31, 1991, he was convicted of misdemeanor assault. The charge was family violence. He was given a fine and sentenced to 4 months in jail. This was his first recorded conviction as an adult. Samuel did not change his behavior after getting out of jail. He kept spending time with friends who also used drugs. He did not have a stable home life. He moved from place to place. He continued to get into fights and use drugs regularly. By early 1992, Samuel was 21 years old. He was using methamphetamines often. He had a friend named James John Steiner. The two of them spent a lot of time together. They would go for days without sleeping while using drugs. Samuel's life had no steady job, no stable home, and no clear direction. He was living day by day, looking for money to buy more drugs. On March 29, 1992, Samuel Gallimore was 21 years old. He was with his friend James John Steiner, who was 19. The two of them had been using methamphetamines for 2 weeks without stopping. They needed more money to buy drugs, so they decided to rob a house. Steiner knew a family that lived in a rural part of Kerr County, Texas. The family was named Kenny. Steiner had worked at a nursing home before. At that nursing home, he had taken care of an elderly woman named Juliana Kenny. Because of this, Steiner knew where the Kenny house was. He also knew that the family might have valuable items inside. On the evening of March 29, 1992, Gallimore and Steiner got into a car. They drove to the Kenny residence. On the way to the house, they talked about what they would do. They agreed that if anyone inside the house tried to stop them from robbing the place, they would kill that person. This was their plan. When they arrived near the house, they did not park directly in front. They parked away from the house so no one would see the car. Then they got out and walked toward the front door. As they walked, Gallimore picked up a cedar tree branch from the ground. He handed the branch to Steiner. Steiner was also carrying a tire iron. These were the tools they brought with them. Gallimore went to the front door. Steiner hid out of sight near the door because Steiner's face was known to the Kenny family. Gallimore knocked on the door. A woman named Adrienne Arnott opened the door. Adrienne Arnott was 44 years old. She was the daughter of Juliana and Vril Kenny. She lived with her parents in the house. As soon as Adrienne opened the door, both men rushed inside. They knocked her down to the ground. Then Gallimore and Steiner began hitting her with the tire iron and the cedar branch. Adrienne tried to fight back and protect herself. She received 12 blunt force blows to her head and face. She also received 14 blunt force blows to her upper body, her back, and her right thigh. Vril Clayton Kenny heard the noise. Vril was 83 years old. He was Adrienne's father and Juliana's husband. He came to help his daughter. Gallimore and Steiner then started hitting Vril with the same tools. Vril received 6 blunt force injuries to his head. These blows were strong enough to cause his death. After beating both Adrienne and Vril, Gallimore went into the kitchen. He found a knife. He took the knife and came back to where Adrienne and Vril were lying on the floor. Gallimore stabbed Vril. Then he stabbed Adrienne. Adrienne was stabbed twice in the neck, creating a 3-inch wound. She also had a stab wound on her right middle finger, which happened because she tried to block the knife with her hand. After stabbing Adrian and Verl, Galamor moved further inside the house. He went into another room. There he found Juliana Kenny. Juliana was 74 years old. She was partially paralyzed. She could not move from her chair. She was not able to stand up or run away. She had been sitting in the chair the whole time, unable to stop what was happening to her husband and daughter. Galamor had the kitchen knife in his hand. He stabbed Juliana in the neck. That stab wound alone would have been enough to kill her. But Galamor did not stop. He kept hitting her with a blunt object, most likely the tire iron. He struck her at least 5 times on the head. He hit her so hard that a large hole opened in her skull. The hole measured 7 inches long and 2 inches wide. All 3 victims died in their own home. Adrian Arnott, Bull Clayton Kenny, and Juliana Kenny were all dead. After the killings, Galamor and Steiner took items from the house. They stole several spoons. They took cash from Adrienne's purse. They also took small items that were on display in the house, like figurines. They did not stay long. They left the house and drove away. Later, Galamor and Steiner buried most of the stolen items on land that belonged to Galamor's parents. They kept some of the cash to buy more drugs. The day after the murders, a maid arrived at the Kenny house to do her regular work. When she entered the home, she found the bodies of Verl, Juliana, and Adrian. She saw the blood and the injuries. She left the house immediately and called the police. Sheriff Rusty Hierholzer was the lead investigator. He and his officers went to the house. They saw how violent the crime was. They found the cedar tree branch outside the house, hidden in some brush. The branch had blood on it. The officers sent the branch to a lab for testing. The lab found a partial fingerprint on the branch. The fingerprint matched Samuel Galamor. Galamor had been arrested before for minor offenses, so his fingerprints were on file. The police did not find Galamor right away. He had left Texas. He moved to Chicago, Illinois. In Chicago, he worked as a home repairman. He did not turn himself in. He also did not try very hard to hide. He later said he was not running from the crime. He said he would accept being caught if it happened. 18 months passed. That is 1.5 years. Then the police received tips from 2 different people through a Crime Stoppers program. Those tips led the police to Galamor. They found him near Chicago. They arrested him and brought him back to Texas. After his arrest, Galamor gave 2 tape-recorded confessions to the police. In those confessions, he described in detail what he and Steiner had done to the 3 victims. He said he and Steiner had been using crack cocaine and methamphetamines. The confessions were played for the jury at his trial. Galamor was indicted on July 22, 1993. His trial was moved to Comal County, Texas, because the crime was so well known in Kerr County. The trial began in January 1994. The jury heard his confessions. They also heard a poem that Galamor wrote while in jail. In the poem, he described the victims begging and pleading. He wrote that he was guilty. On February 1, 1994, the jury found Samuel Galamor guilty of capital murder. On February 3, 1994, the same jury answered the special questions required by Texas law. They decided he should receive the death penalty. The judge sentenced him to death. Galamor appealed his case many times. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals affirmed his conviction in 1996. He filed a federal habeas corpus petition. The federal district court denied relief. The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals also denied relief. The U.S. Supreme Court denied his petition for certiorari on January 31, 2002. All appeals were exhausted. James John Steiner, the accomplice, was also convicted of capital murder. He received a sentence of life in prison. He was not sentenced to death. On January 14, 2003, Samuel Galamor was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit in Texas. He declined to make a final spoken statement from the gurney. Before the execution, he wrote a handwritten statement. In it, he apologized. He said, "I would like to apologize and say I'm sorry, but words seem so hollow and cheap. Their death should not have happened, but it did. I'm so sorry that all of this took place." He also thanked the victim's family for forgiving him. He was pronounced dead at 6:14 p.m. He was 31 years old. Kristen Huffman, the cousin of Adrian Arnott and niece of Juliana Kenny, witnessed the execution. She said her family had forgiven Galamor. She also expressed sympathy for Galamor's family, who lost a son. Sheriff Rusty Heierholzer attended as well. He said the crime was one he would never forget. Samuel Clark Galamor became the first person executed in the United States in 2003 and the 290th person executed in Texas since the death penalty was reinstated in 1976. Story 2. John Richard Baltazar was born on May 9, 1972. He was Hispanic. He grew up in and around Corpus Christi, Texas. His family life was not stable. His parents did not stay together. As a result, John did not have a normal home with both a mother and a father present. He spent much of his childhood without steady parents to guide him. Because his family was broken, John started spending time on the streets. He did not get a good education. He did not finish school with the skills most people have. He learned to survive by himself, but he did not learn how to follow rules or control his anger. When John was a teenager, he began breaking the law. Between 1989 and 1993, he was charged with 10 different misdemeanor crimes in Nueces County. 4 of those charges were for having marijuana. 3 were for evading detention, which means running away from police. 1 was for theft. 1 was for fleeing from the police. 1 was for abusing inhalants, which are chemicals you breathe in to get high. For each of these crimes, he was given short jail sentences between 30 and 100 days. He served those sentences, but the punishment did not change his behavior. John's criminal behavior grew more serious. On November 30th, 1992, he pleaded guilty to 2 felony charges. 1 was burglary of a building. The other was burglary of a habitation, which means breaking into a home. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison for each crime. He served part of that time. He was released, but he did not stop committing crimes. On March 10th, 1994, John pleaded guilty to 2 more felony charges in Nueces County. 1 was burglary of a building again. The other was unauthorized use of a motor vehicle, which means stealing a car. For each of these crimes, he was sentenced to 8 years in prison. He went back to prison to serve those sentences. During these years in prison, John was not able to build a normal adult life. He did not hold a steady job. He did not have a stable home. He did not learn to control his temper. People who knew him later said he had been given every disadvantage. He grew up without a real family. He was basically uneducated. John served time for his 1994 burglary and car theft sentences. He was released from prison in July 1997. That was only 2 months before the events that would change his life forever. At the time of his release, he was still under the control of the criminal justice system. He was placed on parole, which meant he had to follow strict rules. As part of his parole, he was required to wear an electronic monitoring bracelet on his ankle. This bracelet tracked his movements and told parole officers where he was. He was supposed to stay at his home during certain hours. John returned to Corpus Christi after his release. He went back to the same neighborhood and the same people he knew before. He still had a mother, and he was close to her. But his mother had a boyfriend. That boyfriend and John's mother had a troubled relationship. There were fights and arguments. John knew about these problems, and he felt strongly about protecting his mother. He did not like the way the boyfriend treated her. At this point, John Richard Baltazar was 25 years old. He had spent much of his life in jail or prison. He had no real job skills. He had no education. He had a long criminal record. He was on parole and wearing an ankle monitor. And he was angry about how his mother was being treated. That anger was growing inside him every day. On September 27, 1997, John Baltazar learned that his mother had been beaten by her boyfriend. The boyfriend's name was Narciso Ted Cuellar. According to what John heard, Cuellar had used a baseball bat to hit John's mother. This made John very angry. He had never been good at controlling his anger. He decided he was going to find Cuellar and hurt him in return. John knew that Cuellar sometimes stayed at his sister's house. The sister was Matilda Marines. She was married to Arturo Marines. They lived with their children on Panama Drive in Corpus Christi, Texas. Cuellar did not live there full time, but he would sleep on the couch in the living room when he stayed over. John decided to go to that house. He wanted to shoot Cuellar. He did not try to calm down or call the police. He did not try to talk to anyone. He simply chose to use a gun. John found a friend to help him. The friend's name was Johnny Gonzalez. John asked Johnny to come with him to the house. Johnny agreed. They went together. John also collected bullets for his gun. His gun was a .22 caliber revolver. He made sure the gun was loaded. Before leaving, John had been drinking alcohol. He started drinking at 9 o'clock in the morning. By the time he went to the house that night, he had been drinking for many hours. He later said he was drunk. John was still wearing his electronic monitoring bracelet on his ankle. The bracelet was supposed to track his location because he was on parole. He did not remove it. He went anyway. John and Johnny arrived at the Marines' house on Panama Drive. It was late in the evening, around 10:40 p.m. inside the house. Things were calm. Matilda Marines was in the bedroom watching television. Her husband Arturo was also in the bedroom. In the living room, 2 children were on the couch. They were watching a videotape of the Disney movie Sleeping Beauty. The movie had just started. The 2 children were Adriana Marines and Vanessa Marines. Adriana was 5 years old. She was the daughter of Arturo and Matilda. Vanessa was 10 years old. She was Adriana's cousin. The 2 girls were lying on the couch where Ted Cuellar usually slept. But Cuellar was not in the house. He had moved out a week earlier. The girls did not know that anyone was coming to hurt them. John went to the front door. The door was locked. He did not knock. He did not try to open it normally. Instead, he kicked the door with his foot. He kicked it hard enough that the door broke open. He was wearing black Nike sneakers. His footprint stayed on the door. John stepped inside the house. He had his .22 caliber revolver in his hand. He pointed the gun toward the couch. It was dark inside the living room. John could not see clearly. He thought the person on the couch was Ted Cuellar. But it was not Cuellar. It was the 2 little girls. John fired his gun multiple times. He shot toward the couch. 2 bullets hit Adriana Marines in her head. She died almost immediately. 1 bullet hit Vanessa Marines in her chest. Vanessa did not die, but she was badly hurt. The bullet went close to her heart. After shooting the couch, John did not leave. He moved to the back of the house. He went to the bedroom where Arturo and Matilda Marines were. Matilda heard the loud bangs. Her husband got up to see what was happening. Arturo jumped out of bed. When he reached the bedroom door, John was standing there with the gun. Arturo was close to John. John shot him twice. 1 bullet hit Arturo in the mouth. 1 bullet hit him in the neck. Arturo fell down but did not die. Matilda hid in a closet. She called 911 for help. John's friend Johnny Gonzalez was also in the house during the shooting. Johnny did not fire any shots himself, but he was there. He helped John by coming along. He knew what John planned to do. Ted Cuellar, the man John was looking for, was not in the house at all. He had not been there that night. John had broken into the wrong home at the wrong time. He had shot 2 children and a father for no reason, because his real target was not there. When the shooting stopped, John and Johnny left the house. The electronic bracelet on John's ankle had recorded his movements. It showed that he left his home before the shooting and returned shortly after. Inside the house, Adriana Marines was dead on the couch. Vanessa was bleeding from her chest. Arturo was bleeding from his face and neck. Matilda was in the closet on the phone with the police. The movie Sleeping Beauty was still playing on the television. That night, 5-year-old Adriana Marines lost her life because John Baltazar wanted revenge and did not check who was on the couch before he fired his gun. Matilda Marines called 911 from the closet. She stayed on the phone while hiding. Police and ambulances were sent to the house on Panama Drive. When officers arrived, they found Adriana Marines dead on the couch. Vanessa was wounded in her chest. Arturo was wounded in his mouth and neck. Both were taken to a hospital. Doctors saved Vanessa and Arturo, but Adriana could not be saved. Police began looking at the scene. They saw the front door had been kicked in. They found a footprint on the door. The print came from a shoe. Police also talked to the people in the house. Matilda and the children gave descriptions of the shooter. Vanessa, who was 10 years old, told police what she saw. Police also learned about the electronic monitoring bracelet. They checked records from the bracelet. The records showed that John Baltazar had left his home around the time of the shooting. The records also showed he returned home shortly after. This did not match where he was supposed to be. Police arrested John Baltazar on September 30th, 1997, 3 days after the shooting. He was taken into custody. He was wearing black Nike sneakers. Police matched the footprint on the door to those sneakers. The shoes fit the print. Johnny Gonzalez was also arrested. He was charged for his role in the crime. A third person, a 14-year-old boy, was also involved. He had waited outside in a car during the shooting. He later testified about what he saw. During the investigation, police found that John had threatened to kill Ted Cuellar before. John had said he would hurt Cuellar if Cuellar ever broke up with John's mother. This showed that John had planned to use violence. The case went to trial in Nueces County, Texas. The trial began in early 1998. The jury heard from 5 different people who identified John as the gunman. They heard about the footprint on the door. They heard about the ankle bracelet records. They heard from Vanessa, who survived, and from Arturo, who survived. They also heard from the 14-year-old boy who waited in the car. John's defense lawyer argued that maybe Johnny Gonzalez was the shooter, but the evidence pointed to John. The jury did not believe the defense. On March 9, 1998, the jury found John Baltazar guilty of capital murder for the death of Adriana Marines. He was also found guilty of 2 counts of aggravated assault for shooting Vanessa and Arturo. The punishment phase came next. The jury had to decide if John would get life in prison or the death penalty. The prosecutors showed John's long criminal history. They showed that he was a habitual felon. They also presented evidence that he was a member of the Texas Syndicate prison gang. The defense tried to show John's difficult childhood and his good qualities, such as being an artist and a poet. The jury deliberated for about 3 hours. On March 11, 1998, they sentenced John Baltazar to death for the murder of Adriana. He also received 2 life sentences for the aggravated assaults. Johnny Gonzalez was tried separately. Prosecutors did not seek the death penalty for him because he did not fire the gun. He was convicted and sentenced to 80 years in prison for Adriana's death. He also received 40 years for burglary, 60 years for aggravated assault on Arturo, and 80 years for aggravated assault on Vanessa. His sentences were set to run together. He became eligible for parole in 2037. John Baltazar appealed his conviction. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals affirmed or upheld his conviction and death sentence on September 15, 1999. He then filed appeals in federal court. All of his appeals were denied. The U.S. Supreme Court refused to hear his case on October 7, 2002. John asked for clemency, which means mercy. He asked the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles to change his sentence to life or to give him a 90-day delay. The board denied his request. The chief prosecutor wrote a letter saying there was no moral reason to grant leniency. On January 15, 2003, John Richard Baltazar was executed by lethal injection at the state prison in Huntsville, Texas. He was 30 years old. He did not make a final statement. He glanced at the victim's family, but did not apologize. He was pronounced dead at 6:16 p.m. After the execution, John's lawyer said the system had failed to help John become a law-abiding citizen. For the victim's family, the pain did not end. Arturo Marines still had bullet fragments in his jaw. His teeth were crooked. Vanessa Marines, who was 10 at the time of the shooting, still carried the bullet in her chest as a teenager. Doctors could not remove it because it was too close to her heart. Over time, the bullet moved closer to her spine. She felt it when the weather changed. Adriana Marines remained buried, 5 years old forever. The story of John Baltazar ends with a dead child, a wounded family, and a man put to death for a crime he said was an accident, but that the evidence proved was murder. Story 3. Daniel Juan Revilla was born on July 14, 1968. He was a white male. He grew up in the state of Oklahoma in the United States. Not much is known to the public about his parents or his very early childhood, but records show he had a brother. He also had a godmother who stayed close to him later in life. As a young man, Daniel did not go to college. He left school and started working on a farm. Farming work was hard. He worked with his hands and spent long days outside. He was not a wealthy person. He lived a simple life in and around Altus, a small city in Jackson County, Oklahoma. When Daniel was 18 years old, he had a girlfriend. Her name was Michelle McElmurray. Michelle was a teenager as well. She already had a baby son from a previous relationship. The baby's name was Mark Gomez. Mark was born about 13 months before the events that would later take place. Mark's father was Juan Gomez, but Juan and Michelle were no longer together. Daniel and Michelle started living together as a couple. Daniel worked on the farm during the day. Michelle stayed at home with her baby. Daniel did not have any children of his own. He was young and had never been in trouble with the law before. He had no criminal record. His neighbors and co-workers did not see him as a violent person. He seemed like an ordinary young man trying to get by. Daniel spent time with Michelle and her baby. The baby Mark was very small. He was only 13 months old. He had blue eyes and was playful. Mark's father, Juan Gomez, had separated from Michelle. Juan still wanted to see his son. In fact, there was a plan for Juan to take custody of Mark. That plan was set to happen just 2 days after a certain date in January 1987. Daniel knew the baby was not his own child. Some people who knew the couple said Daniel did not like that. But at this point in his life, nothing had been reported to the police. No one had made any official complaints about Daniel's behavior toward the baby. He continued to live with Michelle and helped take care of Mark while Michelle was busy or away from home. Daniel's life in early 1987 was simple. He woke up, went to work on the farm, came home, and spent time with his girlfriend and her baby. He had no major problems with the law. He had no history of fighting or stealing. He was just a young farmhand in a small Oklahoma town. Then one day in January, something happened that would change everything. But that part of the story comes next. The day was January 26, 1987. Daniel Juan Revilla was still 18 years old. That morning, he took his girlfriend Michelle McElmurray to the Jackson County Health Department. She had a medical checkup. The baby, Mark Gomez, was 13 months old. Daniel and Michelle left the baby at their house alone. No adults stayed with the child. They were gone for about 40 minutes. When Daniel returned home alone, He later said he found the baby lying on the floor. He said the baby was not moving and was not breathing. Daniel said he then tried to wake the baby up. He said he hit the baby in the stomach area. He thought hitting the baby's belly might start his breathing again. That did not work. Daniel then said he picked up the baby and took him to the bathroom. He placed the baby in the bathtub. He turned on the water. He said he meant to use cool or warm water to help the baby, but he said he was scared and nervous. Because of his panic, he said he accidentally turned the handle to hot water. Very hot water came out. The hot water poured over the baby's body. The hot water burned the baby's skin. The baby got blisters and burns on his chest and other parts of his body. Daniel then said he lifted the baby out of the tub. He decided to take the baby to the hospital. He was in a hurry. As he ran out of the bathroom, he said the baby's head hit the side of the door frame. The door frame was made of wood. The impact struck the baby's head. Then Daniel said he ran toward the door to leave the house. He said he tripped. He fell down onto a concrete floor. He landed on top of the baby. The baby's small body took the full weight of Daniel's fall. After that, Daniel picked the baby up again. He carried Mark Gomez into the county hospital. He ran through the lobby holding the baby in his arms. He was screaming that the child was not breathing. Hospital workers took the baby from him. They tried to help Mark, but it was too late. The baby was already dead. Later, doctors looked closely at the baby's body. They found many injuries. The baby had bruises on his body. He had blisters on his chest. He had burns on his skin. He had cuts on his thighs. The skin on his chest and groin was peeling off. The baby's brain was swollen and bleeding inside his skull. His liver was completely torn in two. The liver had been cut all the way through. The doctors also looked for signs of older injuries. They found evidence that the baby had been hurt many times over the 2 weeks before he died. The injuries were not all from one day. Some were from earlier days. People who knew Daniel and Michelle later spoke about what they had seen before that day. Michelle told others that Daniel did not like the baby because Mark was not Daniel's own son. She said that Daniel had done bad things to the baby in the weeks before. She said Daniel had shut the baby inside a kitchen drawer. He had folded the baby up inside a hide-a-bed, which is a sofa that opens into a bed. He had put the baby into cold water on purpose. He had hung the baby upside down by his ankles using duct tape. 2 other witnesses also saw these things happen. They saw Daniel hurt the baby in these ways. But before January 26, 1987, no one had called the police. No one had stopped Daniel. The abuse continued without anyone reporting it to the authorities. Daniel told a different story. He said everything that happened to the baby was an accident. He said he only hit the baby to try to save him. He said the hot water was a mistake. He said hitting the baby's head on the door frame and falling on him were also accidents. He said he did not mean to hurt Mark at all. But the baby's body told a different story. The doctors saw that the baby's liver was completely severed. That kind of injury does not happen from one small hit. It takes a very hard blow to the stomach. The swelling and bleeding in the brain also came from strong force. The burns and cuts and bruises were too many to be simple accidents. At the time of the baby's death, Daniel was alone with him. Michelle was not at home. There were no other witnesses inside the house. Only Daniel knew exactly what happened. But the physical evidence on the baby's body showed a pattern of repeated abuse. The baby had suffered for weeks. The final injuries were extreme. Daniel did not call for help right away. Instead, he waited. He drove to the hospital only after he had tried to clean up the scene. When he arrived, the baby was already dead. The hospital staff saw the injuries and knew something was wrong. They did not believe Daniel's story about accidents. But they did not arrest him at that moment. They simply reported what they saw to the authorities. That would come later. This was the crime. A 13-month-old baby named Mark Gomez was dead. His body showed signs of long-term torture and a final brutal beating that cut his liver in half. The person responsible was Daniel Juan Revilla, the 18-year-old boyfriend of the baby's mother. The hospital staff in Altus, Oklahoma, saw the baby's injuries and knew they were not from simple accidents. They contacted the authorities. The police began asking questions immediately. Doctors performed an autopsy on Mark Gomez. The autopsy confirmed that the baby had a swollen and bleeding brain and a liver that was completely severed in half. The medical experts said these injuries could not have happened the way Daniel Revilla described. One doctor said the baby was beaten to a pulp. The police arrested Daniel Revilla. He was charged with first-degree murder. He was taken to the Jackson County Jail. While he was waiting for his trial, something happened. In October 1987, Daniel escaped from the jail. He had a girlfriend waiting for him outside. Together, they fled to Mexico. Law enforcement officers chased him. They almost caught him in Wellington, Texas, but he got away. Mexican authorities later captured Daniel in Acapulco, Mexico. He was brought back to Oklahoma to face trial. Daniel's trial took place in Jackson County District Court. The jury heard from medical experts. The experts explained that the baby's injuries were caused by extreme force, not by falling or by attempts to revive him. The jury also heard from Michelle McElmurray, the baby's mother. She testified that Daniel hated Mark because the boy was not his child. She told the jury about the abuse she had seen. Daniel shutting the baby in a kitchen drawer, folding him inside a hide-a-bed, dunking him in cold water, and hanging him upside down by his ankles with duct tape. 2 other witnesses confirmed these events. Daniel maintained his innocence. He repeated his story about finding the baby lifeless, trying to revive him by hitting his abdomen, accidentally using hot water, hitting the baby's head on a door frame, and falling on top of him. The jury did not believe him. They found Daniel Juan Revilla guilty of first-degree murder. The trial then moved to the penalty phase. The jury had to decide whether Daniel should get life in prison or the death penalty. The prosecutors pointed to the severe and repeated abuse over 2 weeks. They argued that Daniel was dangerous. Daniel's lawyers tried to argue that he was young, only 18 at the time of the murder, and had no prior criminal record. But the jury decided that the crime was so brutal that the death penalty was the right punishment. On December 4th, 1987, the judge sentenced Daniel to death by lethal injection. After the sentence, Daniel began appealing his case. He tried to stop his execution by arguing that his trial lawyers had been ineffective and that his constitutional rights had been violated. In 1996, he told a judge he wanted to drop all appeals and die within 60 days. But 2 years later, he changed his mind and started appealing again. He claimed he was innocent. The courts reviewed his arguments. The 10th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals rejected his appeals in a long written decision. The U.S. Supreme Court also refused to hear his case. On January 16, 2003, Daniel Revilla was 34 years old. He spent his final hours visiting with his brother and his godmother. He ate a last meal of 3 large hamburgers, 2 orders of fries, an order of jumbo shrimp, for mini pecan pies, and a large cherry cola. That evening, he was taken to the death chamber at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester. The baby's father, Juan Gomez, and 4 other family members came to witness the execution. When asked if he had a final statement, Daniel shook his head no. The lethal injection was given at 6:12 p.m. He was pronounced dead. After the execution, Juan Gomez said he felt that justice had finally been served for his son Mark. He also said he forgave Daniel Revilla and felt sorry for Daniel's family. The case was closed. Mark Gomez, a 13-month-old boy with blue eyes, never got to grow up, and the man who killed him paid for that crime with his own life. Story 4. Robert Andrew Lookingbill was born on July 22, 1965. He was a white male. He was born in Texas, in a county called Hidalgo County. This county is in the southern part of the state, near the border with Mexico. Robert grew up in Hidalgo County. He did not have a wealthy or unusual childhood. He lived with his parents for most of his young life. Later, he also lived with his grandparents. His grandparents were named Lorenz and Adeline Dannenberg. They were older. Lorenz was born around 1912, and Adeline was born around 1919. Robert did not like school very much. He went to high school, but he did not finish. He dropped out when he was in the 11th grade. After leaving school, he did not get a steady career. He worked as a construction worker from time to time, but he did not hold a steady job for a long period. When Robert was a young man, he started to break the law. He also started to use drugs and alcohol. He drank beer and liquor. He also used cocaine. His habit of using cocaine became a regular part of his life. He spent money on drugs. In December 1984, something serious happened. A woman named Gloria Huppengarner was killed. She lived near Robert's grandparents. Robert was connected to her death. At the time, the police did not charge him for this crime. But later, during another court case, people would talk about what happened to Gloria. For now, it is only important to know that this event was part of Robert's past. In 1985, Robert was caught for a different crime. He was found guilty of burglary. Specifically, he broke into a home with the intent to commit aggravated assault. This happened in December 1985. Then in February 1986, a judge sentenced him to 7 years in prison. Robert did not serve all 7 years. Texas had rules about prison overcrowding at that time. Many prisoners were released early. Robert served only about 8.5 months. He was released on parole in 1987. After he got out of prison, Robert went to live with his grandparents again. Lorenz and Adeline Dannenberg had a house in San Juan, Texas. San Juan is a small city in Hidalgo County. Robert moved into their home. He lived there with them. He did not pay rent. He stayed in the house and came and went as he pleased. Robert still used cocaine after he got out of prison. He still drank alcohol. He did not have a stable job. He often needed money to buy drugs. His grandparents received Social Security money every month. They got more than $500 at the beginning of each month. Adeline kept some of that money in her purse. Robert knew this. Robert's grandfather Lorenz was getting older. Lorenz was 77 years old in 1989. Adeline was 70. They trusted Robert. They let him live in their home. They did not know that Robert had a serious drug problem. They did not know that he needed money badly. By late 1989, Robert was 24 years old. He had been out of prison for about 2 years. He had no job. He had no money of his own. He wanted cocaine. He knew his grandmother kept cash in her purse. He also knew where the metal tools were kept in the shed behind the house. Robert spent the evening of December 4th, 1989, drinking alcohol and using cocaine. He stayed out late. He did not come home until after midnight. When he came back, the house was dark. His grandparents were asleep. His grandfather Lorenz was sleeping on the floor in the living room. His grandmother Adeline was sleeping in her bed. Robert came home between 12:30 and 1:30 in the morning on December 5th, 1989. He was still feeling the effects of cocaine and alcohol. He later described himself as all coked up. He needed money to buy more drugs. He knew his grandmother kept cash in her purse. He did not turn on the lights. He went to the shed behind the house. Inside the shed, there was a long metal bar. The bar was 54 inches long. That is 4.5 feet. It was 2 inches thick around. It weighed between 20 and 40 pounds. Robert took this bar out of the shed. He went back into the house. His grandfather Lorenz was sleeping on the floor in the living room. Robert walked up to him. He raised the metal bar over his head. Then he brought it down hard on Lorenz's head. Lorenz did not yell out. He only groaned in pain. Robert hit him more than once. The blows caused deep wounds to Lorenz's skull. After that, Robert walked down the hall to his grandmother's bedroom. Adeline was sleeping in her bed. It was dark, but Robert knew where she was lying. He raised the same metal bar and hit her on the head. She did not yell out either. He hit her multiple times. The blows fractured her skull, her jaw, and her hand. Bone fragments were driven into her brain. Robert then went to Adeline's purse. He took the money inside. The total amount found later in his pocket was $568.31. This matched the amount of Social Security money his grandparents had received a few days earlier, around the 1st of December. After taking the money, Robert called the police. But before the police arrived, he went to a neighbor's apartment. The neighbor was Melissa Martinez. She rented an apartment behind the Dannenberg house. Another person was with her that night, a man named Alberto Aguilar. He had given Melissa a ride home from work around 11:45 p.m. on December 4th. Robert knocked on Melissa's door. He told them that someone had come into his grandparents' house and beaten them up. Alberto Aguilar listened to Robert's voice. He later said that Robert did not sound very convincing, but they followed Robert back to the Dannenberg house. When they entered, they saw Lorenz lying on the floor with blood on his head. Then they saw Adeline on her bed. Her face was badly beaten. Alberto Aguilar noticed something else. On the way to the house, he saw a motorcycle parked outside. He was sure that motorcycle had not been there when he and Melissa arrived at 11:45 p.m. Robert told them he had already called the police. While they waited for the police to arrive, Alberto Aguilar heard a noise coming from the storage shed behind the house. It sounded like metal clinking. The police arrived soon after. An officer named Gilberto Alanes was one of the first at the scene. He walked through the house. He saw no signs of forced entry. No doors or windows had been broken. The house had not been ransacked. Nothing was thrown around. The only things out of place were the two injured people. Officer Alanes looked at Robert's boots. There were blood stains on them. He looked at Robert's jacket. There were blood spatters on it. Robert told the officer that he had just arrived at the house on his motorcycle and found his grandparents already beaten. Officer Alanes went outside and touched the engine of the motorcycle. If Robert had just arrived, the engine would be very hot. But the engine was only warm. That meant the motorcycle had been sitting there for some time. Officer Alanes went to check the tool shed. He went inside once and looked around. Then he came out. Later, he saw Robert trying to enter the shed. Officer Alanes asked Robert what he was doing. Robert said he was nervous and worried about his grandparents. The officer told him to leave the shed. Later, another investigator went into the shed and found the metal bar. It had blood stains on it and strands of hair stuck to it. Robert's grandmother Adeline was taken to a hospital. She had fractures in her skull, jaw, and hand. Doctors performed surgery to remove bone fragments and a blood clot from her brain, but her injuries were too severe. She died 10 days after the attack, on December 15, 1989. She was 70 years old. Robert's grandfather Lorenz survived the attack, but he was badly injured. He suffered permanent brain damage. He remained unconscious for about a year. He could not speak or help the police. He died approximately 1 year after the attack from his injuries. The police took Robert's jacket, boots, and jeans as evidence. When they searched the pockets of his jeans, they found $568.31. That money matched the Social Security payment his grandparents had received. The police questioned Robert. He gave them 2 different statements. In the first statement, he said he arrived at the house around 1:15 a.m. and found his grandparents already beaten. In the second statement, he changed his story. He said he had been drinking and using cocaine. He admitted that he took the metal bar from the garage. He admitted hitting his grandfather while the old man slept on the floor. He admitted hitting his grandmother while she slept in her bed. He admitted taking the money from her purse. Then he said he called the police and went to the neighbor's apartment. At the time of this crime, Robert was still on parole from his previous burglary sentence. But that fact had already been covered in Part 1. What matters for this part is the action itself. He beat two sleeping elderly people with a heavy metal bar to steal money for cocaine. After Robert Lookingbill gave his second confession to the police on the morning of December 5th, 1989, he was arrested. The police had enough evidence to hold him. They had his confession. They had the blood on his boots and jacket. They had the metal bar with blood and hair. They had the $568.31 in his pocket. They had no signs of forced entry. They had the warm motorcycle engine that proved he had not just arrived. Robert was charged with 2 crimes. The first charge was capital murder for the death of his grandmother Adeline Dannenberg. The second charge was attempted capital murder for the attack on his grandfather Lorenz Dannenberg. Because Lorenz was still alive at the time of the trial, the charge was attempted murder, not murder. On February 15, 1990, a grand jury in Hidalgo County formally indicted Robert. That means they decided there was enough evidence to take him to trial. The trial was held later that year. It was a consolidated trial, meaning both charges were heard together. The prosecutors were from Hidalgo County. One of them was named Sofia Arizpe. The defense lawyers argued that Robert was not guilty of capital murder. Robert himself later claimed he did not kill his grandmother. But at trial, his confession was presented as evidence. The jury heard testimony from several witnesses. Officer Gilberto Alanes testified about the blood on Robert's clothes and the motorcycle engine. Alberto Aguilar testified that Robert's voice did not sound convincing and that he heard metal clinking from the shed. The investigator who found the metal bar testified about the blood and hair. The doctor who treated Adeline testified about her injuries. The pathologist who performed the autopsy testified that the metal bar could have caused those injuries. Joyce Dannenberg, the daughter of Lorenz and Adeline, testified that her parents received more than $500 in Social Security at the beginning of December and that her mother kept cash in her purse. The jury also heard about Robert's past. During the sentencing phase of the trial, the prosecution introduced evidence of another crime. They showed that in December 1984, Robert had murdered a neighbor named Gloria Huppengarner. He had bragged about that murder and robbery to several people. He had never been charged or convicted for that crime before. But the law in Texas allowed the prosecution to present this evidence during the punishment phase to show that Robert was a continuing threat to society. On November 15, 1990, the jury found Robert Lookingbill guilty of capital murder for the death of Adeline Dannenberg. He was also found guilty of attempted capital murder for the attack on Lorenz Dannenberg. On November 19, 1990, the same jury decided his punishment. For the capital murder of his grandmother, the jury sentenced him to death. The judge then gave him a separate sentence of 75 years in prison for the attempted capital murder of his grandfather. After the trial, Robert began the appeals process. First, he filed a direct appeal with the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. His lawyers raised 20 points of error, then added one more. On April 6, 1994, the Court of Criminal Appeals denied all claims and affirmed the conviction and death sentence. Robert asked for a rehearing. On June 8, 1994, that request was denied. The mandate was issued on September 12, 1994. Next, Robert filed a state habeas corpus petition. That is a legal request asking the court to review whether his imprisonment was lawful. He filed a skeletal petition on April 21, 1997, then added more claims on August 20, 1997. On March 4, 1998, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals denied relief. Then Robert went to federal court. On July 23, 1999, he filed a federal habeas corpus petition raising 37 claims. On August 24, 2000, the federal district court dismissed his petition. The court said he had filed it too late, past the legal deadline. Robert appealed to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. On June 3, 2002, the Fifth Circuit agreed with the lower court and dismissed the petition as untimely. Robert asked for a rehearing, but on July 10, 2002, the Fifth Circuit denied that request. On January 2, 2003, Robert asked the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles for clemency. Clemency means mercy. He asked them to stop his execution or change his sentence to life in prison. On January 13, 2003, the United States Supreme Court denied his request for review. On January 17, 2003, the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles voted to deny clemency. The execution was scheduled for Wednesday, January 22, 2003, after 6 p.m. It took place at the Huntsville Unit in Texas, a prison known as the Walls Unit. The method was lethal injection. Before the execution, Robert was asked what he wanted for his final meal. He requested fried chicken, French fries, iced tea, apple pie, jalapenos, garlic bread, and vanilla ice cream. At the time of his death, Robert was 37 years old. He had spent just over 12 years on death row. In the death chamber, Robert was strapped to a gurney. He gave a final statement. He thanked his loved ones who were standing nearby, including his wife Brenda and some friends. He told them to be strong and not to hate. He said to learn from the experience. He said he was still faithful and still strong. He told them not to forget him and to burn a candle for him when they could. He then mouthed kisses to his supporters. The lethal drugs were injected. Robert let out 2 strong breaths. He was pronounced dead at 6:18 p.m. on January 22, 2003. Robert Andrew Lookingbill became the 824th person executed in the United States since 1976, and the 292nd person executed in Texas since that same year. His grandfather Lorenz Dannenberg had died approximately 1 year after the attack from the brain damage Robert caused. His grandmother Adeline Dannenberg died 10 days after the attack. Robert's own actions took the lives of both people who had let him live in their home, and the state of Texas took his life in return. Story 5. Alva Ezeal Curry was born on March 22, 1969. He was born in the United States. His race was black. Not much public information exists about his parents or his very early childhood. As a young man, Alva did not stay in school for a long time. He had a low level of education. He did not learn advanced reading or job skills. This made it difficult for him to find good jobs later in life. When Alva became older, he worked as a laborer. A laborer does physical work like lifting or cleaning. He also worked as a busboy. A busboy cleans tables in a restaurant. He lost his busboy job because he was late to work too many times. After he lost that job, he could not find new work easily. Alva started to spend time with people who sold drugs. He became a drug dealer himself. He also joined a gang. A gang is a group of people who commit crimes together. He did not have a steady job at that time. Alva had some minor trouble with the law before the main events of his life. He was convicted of misdemeanor theft. Misdemeanor means a small crime. He was also convicted of public intoxication. Public intoxication means being drunk in a public place. These were not serious felonies. Felonies are big crimes like murder or robbery. Alva also had a history of threats. On 2 different times, he threatened to kill his older brother. One time, he threatened to kill his mother-in-law. These threats showed that Alva had anger inside him. But at this point in his life, he had not yet committed a murder. At the time of the killings that would come later, Alva was 22 years old. He was free on bond. Bond means he paid money to stay out of jail while waiting for a court date. He was on bond for a crime where he hurt his sister-in-law. The charge was assault. Assault means hurting someone on purpose. Alva was living a life without rules. He sold drugs. He was in a gang. He had lost his job. He was out on bond for an assault. He was angry and made threats to his family. He was spending time with other people who also broke the law. One of those people was a young man named Mark Davis. Mark was 18 years old at the time. Alva did not have a plan for his future. He did not have money. He did not have a home that he owned. He lived in Austin, Texas. He was a young man with few options and many bad habits. He chose to spend time with criminals. He chose to carry guns. He chose to think that violence was a way to solve problems. That was the life Alva Curry was living in October 1991. He was 22 years old. He had no real job. He had a bond for assault. He had a gang. He had a friend named Mark Davis. He had a gun. He had no money. And he was about to make a series of choices that would change everything. On October 16, 1991, around 2:09 in the morning, Alva Curry and his friend Mark Davis made a decision. They decided to rob a convenience store. They chose a Texaco store on Techni Center Drive in Austin, Texas. The store was near Ed Bluestein Boulevard in East Austin. It was late at night, so there were few people around. Both men carried guns. Curry had a handgun. Davis also had a handgun. They walked into the store together. Once inside, Curry jumped over the counter. The counter was the long table where the cash register sat. He landed behind the counter where the clerk stood. The clerk that night was a 20-year-old man named David Vela. David was Hispanic. He was working alone. He did not know Curry or Davis. He had never met them before. He was just doing his job. Curry put his gun directly against David Vela's head. He held the gun to David's temple. The temple is the side of the head near the eye. Then Curry gave an order. He told David to open the cash register. David Vela tried to do what Curry said. He opened the register. Inside the register was $220. David did not fight back. He did not run. He followed the instruction because he did not want to get hurt. He thought that if he obeyed, the men would leave and he would stay alive. But that did not happen. After Curry took the money from the register, he pulled the trigger. He shot David Vela in the temple while the gun was still touching David's head. The bullet went into David's brain. David died right away. He fell to the floor behind the counter. Even though David was already dead, Curry and Davis did not stop. Before they left the store, they shot David Vela 4 more times. They fired extra bullets into his body. Then they took the entire cash register drawer. The drawer was the metal box that held the money. They pulled it out of the register and carried it with them as they ran out of the store. The whole event was recorded on the store's security camera. The camera was mounted on the ceiling or wall. It filmed everything. It showed Curry jumping over the counter. It showed him putting the gun to David's head. It showed him shooting. It also showed the clothes both men wore. Their clothing had special colors or patterns that made them easy to see on the tape. That was the first murder. But Curry and Davis did not stop. 1 week later, on October 23, 1991, they committed another robbery. This time they went to a different convenience store. It was a Payless store. They robbed it in much the same way. They carried guns. They demanded money. The clerk that night was a 23-year-old man named Brendan Prosk. Brendan was white. Curry and Davis killed Brendan Prosk during that robbery too. The method was similar to the first murder. They shot him. The robbery did not give them much money. They took less than $75. But Brendan Prosk died anyway. In both crimes, the victims were innocent store clerks. They were working late at night. They were alone. They did not know their killers. They did not fight back. They tried to follow orders. But that did not save them. Curry shot them both. Davis helped. After the second murder, Curry and Davis continued to live normally. They went home. They kept the guns. They kept the cash register drawer from the first store. They wore the same clothes again. They did not tell anyone what they had done. They did not turn themselves in. They simply went back to their daily lives. But the security camera from the Texaco store kept recording. The tape was still there. The police had not yet seen it. The store had not yet been cleaned. David Vela's body was found on the floor by the next person who came to the store. That person called for help. The police arrived. They found the body. They found the bullet casings. They found the empty cash register. And they found the security tape. The tape showed two men in distinctive clothing. One man jumped over the counter. That man was Alva Curry. But at that moment, the police did not know his name. They only had pictures. They only had clothing descriptions. They did not have an arrest yet. The same thing happened at the Payless store. Brendan Prosk's body was found. The police saw that the crime was similar to the Texaco murder. But they did not yet know who did it. Alva Curry had now committed 2 capital murders. A capital murder is a murder that happens during another serious crime, like robbery. Under Texas law, this crime could lead to the death penalty. Curry was 22 years old. He had killed 2 young men in 1 week. He had done it for less than $300 total. He had done it with a gun. He had done it with his friend Mark Davis. Curry did not turn himself in. He did not tell his family. He did not throw away the gun or the clothes or the cash register drawer. He kept everything at his home. He acted as if nothing had happened. He went back to selling drugs. He went back to his gang. He went back to his life. But the security tape did not go away. The police had it. They were looking at it. They were looking for the man in the distinctive clothing who jumped over the counter and shot a young clerk in the temple. They did not know his name yet, but they were trying to find him. That search would lead them to Alva Curry. The first person to discover the crime at the Texaco store was not a police officer. It was the next person who came to the store after David Vela was killed. That person saw David's body on the floor and called for help. The police arrived. They saw that David had been shot multiple times. They saw that the cash register was open and the drawer was missing. They found the security camera tape. The police watched the tape. The tape showed 2 men. One man jumped over the counter. That man held a gun to David's head and fired. The tape was grainy, meaning it was not perfectly clear. But the clothing the men wore was distinctive. It had special colors or patterns that stood out. The police took note of those clothes. After the second murder at the Payless store 1 week later, the police saw a pattern. Both stores had been robbed late at night. Both clerks were shot. Both crimes involved 2 men with guns. The police began to look for 2 suspects. They did not have names yet. They only had the video images and the clothing descriptions. Then a tip came in. A confidential informant called the police. A confidential informant is someone who gives information to the police, but keeps their name secret. This informant told the police the name of one of the men on the video. The name was Alva Curry. The informant also told them where Curry lived. On November 8, 1991, the police went to Alva Curry's home. That was 3 weeks after the first murder. When they arrived, they searched the house. They found the clothing that matched the clothes on the security video. They found one of the guns that was used in the murders. They also found the missing cash register drawer from the Texaco store. All of these items were in Curry's home. On that same day, November 8, 1991, the police questioned Alva Curry. He did not stay silent. He gave a confession. He told the police everything he had done. He admitted that he was the man who jumped over the counter. He admitted that he shot David Vela in the temple. He admitted that he and Mark Davis fired 4 more shots after David was already dead. The police recorded his confession on video. Curry was arrested that day. He was taken to jail. Mark Davis was also arrested later. Davis received a life sentence for his part in the crimes. On March 12, 1992, the state of Texas officially charged Alva Curry with capital murder for the death of David Vela. The case was brought to the 167th Judicial District Court in Travis County, Texas. Curry said he was not guilty, but the evidence was very strong. The security tape showed him. His own confession was on video. The clothes and gun were found in his home. The trial began. The jury watched the security tape. They heard Curry's confession. On October 28, 1992, the jury returned a verdict. They found Alva Curry guilty of capital murder. Then came the punishment phase. The jury had to decide if Curry would get life in prison or the death penalty. They answered the special questions required by Texas law. On November 5, 1992, the jury's answers meant that the judge had to sentence Curry to death. He was sent to death row. Curry did not give up. He appealed his case. An appeal is a request for a higher court to review the case. First, he appealed to the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. On November 22, 1995, that court agreed with the trial. They said the conviction and death sentence were correct. Curry did not appeal that decision to the United States Supreme Court at that time. Then Curry filed a different kind of appeal called a habeas corpus petition. This is a request to be released from prison because of a legal mistake. The state court denied it on May 6, 1998. Then he took his case to federal court. The federal district court denied his request on September 30, 1999. He appealed that decision to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. On July 18, 2000, the Fifth Circuit said the district court was correct. Finally, he asked the United States Supreme Court to hear his case. On March 26, 2001, the Supreme Court said no. They refused to review it. On October 25, 2002, the trial court set a date for Curry's execution. The date was January 28, 2003. On that day, January 28, 2003, Curry was in the Huntsville Unit Prison in Texas. He was given a final meal. He chose chicken fried steak, country gravy, hot buttered corn, mashed potatoes, hot buttered rolls, hot apple pie, vanilla ice cream, and tea. The execution was scheduled for after 6 p.m., but there was a delay. Curry's lawyers filed last-minute appeals to the United States Supreme Court. The Supreme Court needed time to look at them. The execution was delayed for about 2 hours. Finally, the Supreme Court rejected the appeals. The execution could go forward. Curry was taken to the execution room. He was strapped to a table. Needles were placed in his arms so the lethal drugs could enter his body. Through a window, family members of his victims watched. David Vela's family was there. Brendan Prosk's family may have been there as well. Curry gave his final words. He said, "I pray with the help of God that you will forgive me for the pain I caused your family. I am truly sorry. I wish I could take it back, but I just pray and ask that you forgive me." Then the warden signaled for the lethal injection to begin. The drugs flowed into Curry's body. He coughed and sputtered as the drugs took effect. At 8:09 p.m., he was pronounced dead. Alva Curry was 33 years old when he was executed. He was the fourth person executed in Texas in 2003. He was the 293rd person executed in Texas since 1976, when the death penalty was allowed again in the United States. At the time of his death, Curry was also serving a life sentence for the murder of Brendan Prosk, the second convenience store clerk killed 1 week after David Vela. He never served that life sentence because he was executed first. David Vela's family lost a 20-year-old son and brother. Brendan Prosk's family lost a 23-year-old son and brother. Both young men were working late at night to earn money. Both were killed for less than $300 total. Mark Davis, the accomplice, was not executed. He received a life sentence for his role in the murders. Alva Curry alone received the death penalty. The case was closed. The security tape and the confession were the main reasons Curry was caught and convicted. and on January 28, 2003, Alva Ezeal Curry took his final breath. The story of Alva Curry ends with his death by lethal injection, while the memories of David Vela and Brendan Prosk remain with those who loved them. Story 6. Richard Eugene Dinkins was born on September 29, 1962, in Texas. He grew up in a normal household. His family was not involved in crime or violence. As a child, he did not show signs of aggression or strange behavior. When he became a young adult, Richard joined the United States Air Force. He served his country for a period of time. After leaving the Air Force, he got a job as an assembly specialist. He worked at a company called American Valve and Hydrant. His job was to put together parts for fire hydrants and water valves. Richard had a shoulder injury from some point in his past. The injury caused him pain and limited his movement. Because of this injury, he often wore a shoulder sling. The sling helped support his arm. People who knew Richard said he was gentle and mild-mannered. He did not have a reputation for fighting or losing his temper. In fact, one time at the Texas Employment Commission, Richard saw a man attacking an employee. Richard stepped in and subdued the attacker. The commission called him a hero for this action. Despite his gentle nature, Richard had problems with money. He did not earn enough to cover all his expenses. He also went through a difficult breakup with a romantic partner. This breakup caused him a lot of emotional stress. At the same time, his employer at American Valve and Hydrant wanted to fire him because of his shoulder injury. They thought the injury made him unable to do his job properly. This added even more stress to his life. To deal with his stress, Richard started going to a massage therapy clinic. The clinic was called Therapeutic Massage. It was located in Beaumont, Texas. The owner of the clinic was a woman named Catherine Thompson. She was 46 years old and also worked as a nurse and a substance abuse counselor. Richard visited the clinic to receive massages and to relax. Richard did not always pay with real money. Instead, he wrote checks to Catherine Thompson for his appointments. But many of those checks bounced. The bank would not pay the money because Richard did not have enough funds in his account. This happened more than once. In 1986, Richard was convicted of theft by check in Abilene, Texas. That means he wrote a bad check and got in trouble with the law. Then in July 1990, just a few months before the events that would change his life, he was fined again for issuing bad checks. This happened in Lumberton, Texas. Even with these fines, Richard had never been sent to jail. He had no adult incarcerations and no juvenile criminal history. He had never been locked up before. Richard continued to see Catherine Thompson for massage therapy. But she became unhappy about the bad checks. She wanted to talk with him about the money he owed her. Richard agreed to meet with her to discuss the problem. He set up an appointment for the evening of September 12, 1990. He planned to go to her clinic after work. The day before that appointment, on September 11, 1990, Richard went to a store and bought a .357 Magnum revolver. He also bought ammunition for it. He already owned a .25 caliber automatic handgun. He did not tell anyone why he wanted these guns. On the morning of September 12, 1990, Richard got ready for his day. He put on his shoulder sling for his injured arm. Then he placed both handguns inside the sling. The .25 caliber pistol and the new .357 revolver were hidden under his clothing. He went to work as usual. After work, he drove toward the massage clinic to keep his appointment with Catherine Thompson. Richard drove to Therapeutic Massage at 3420 Fannin Street in Beaumont, Texas. He arrived around 6:30 p.m. on September 12, 1990. He had made the appointment under a false name, so Catherine Thompson did not know it was him coming. When Richard walked into the clinic, Catherine Thompson was there. Also in the clinic was another woman. Her name was Shelley Cutler. She was 32 years old. Shelley was a registered nurse who worked as a traveling nurse. She had only been in Beaumont for 9 days. She came to the clinic that evening to fill out an application for her first massage appointment with Catherine. Shelley was sitting in the waiting room. Richard and Catherine Thompson began talking about the bad checks. He owed her money from his past visits. The conversation did not go well. It quickly turned into a heated argument. Catherine was not afraid of Richard. She was described as a small but strong woman. She told Richard to leave. Catherine pushed Richard toward the door that led into the waiting room. As she pushed him, she struck his injured arm. This hurt Richard. He later said the pain made him react. During the struggle, both handguns fell out of Richard's shoulder sling. The .25 caliber pistol and the .357 Magnum revolver dropped onto the floor. Richard moved quickly. He picked up the .25 caliber pistol first. He pointed it at Catherine Thompson and pulled the trigger. He fired one shot, but he missed her. Then he tried to fire a second time. The gun jammed. That means the bullet got stuck and the gun would not shoot again. Richard dropped the jammed pistol. He then picked up the .357 Magnum revolver from the floor. This gun worked properly. He aimed at Catherine Thompson from close range. He pulled the trigger. The first bullet hit her in the upper abdomen. She fell or staggered. Then Richard fired again. The second bullet hit her in the head. Both wounds were fatal. Catherine Thompson died shortly after from these gunshot wounds. Shelley Cutler was in the waiting room when the argument started. She heard the struggle and the gunfire. She became very scared. She ran toward Catherine Thompson's office. She went inside and tried to lock the door behind her. She wanted to hide and probably tried to call for help. Richard saw someone moving out of the corner of his eye. He heard a door rattling. He did not know who was back there. He went toward the office. There was a reception window, an opening in the wall used to talk to people at the desk. Richard raised his .357 revolver and fired through that window. The bullet traveled through the opening and struck Shelley Cutler in the top of her head. She fell to the floor. She was still alive but badly wounded. The smoke from the gunshots drifted upward and set off a fire alarm in the building. The alarm started making a loud noise. Richard heard it and fled. He ran out of the clinic, got into his vehicle, and drove away. The fire alarm brought emergency workers to the building. They arrived around 8 p.m. They expected to find a fire. Instead, they found 2 women with gunshot wounds. Catherine Thompson was still alive, but barely. Emergency workers took her to a hospital. She died shortly after arriving. Shelley Cutler was taken to the same hospital. She remained alive through the night, but the next morning, September 13th, 1990, she died from her single gunshot wound to the head. Richard left the clinic with blood on his blue jeans. He still had the .357 Magnum revolver with him. He drove to his home in Sour Lake, Texas. He hid the gun there. He did not tell anyone what he had done. When the fire alarm went off at the clinic, emergency workers were sent to the building. They arrived at 3420 Fannin Street in Beaumont around 8 p.m. They did not find a fire. Instead, they found Catherine Thompson and Shelley Cutler on the floor with gunshot wounds. The emergency workers called the police right away. Police officers arrived at the clinic. They looked around the building for evidence. They found bullet holes and spent bullet casings. They also found an appointment book on the desk. The book listed the names of people who had appointments with Catherine Thompson. One name in the book caught the officers' attention. It was a false name, but police later connected that name to Richard Dinkins. The police also found other evidence at the scene. They collected the slugs, the pieces of metal that came from the bullets. These slugs were kept as evidence. A firearms expert would later examine them. While the police were investigating the clinic, they started looking for Richard Dinkins. They found out where he lived. They went to his home in Sour Lake, Texas. When they arrived, they searched his property. Inside his truck, they found the .357 Magnum revolver. This was the same gun used to shoot both women. The gun was hidden there. The police also looked at Richard's clothing. They saw blood on his blue jeans. They took samples of that blood. Later, an FBI forensic serologist, a scientist who studies body fluids, tested the blood. The scientist found that the blood on Richard's jeans was consistent with Catherine Thompson's blood type. This meant it was likely her blood. The police arrested Richard Dinkins. He did not fight or run. After the arrest, he agreed to give a confession. He told the police what happened that night. He admitted that he shot both women. He said he did not plan to kill them. He claimed the gun went off during a struggle. But he took responsibility for his actions. The case went to trial. The trial happened in the 252nd District Court of Jefferson County, Texas. It began in early 1992. The prosecutors presented all the evidence. The firearms expert testified in court. The expert said the slugs found at the crime scene were fired from Richard's .357 revolver. The FBI scientist testified about the blood on Richard's jeans. The prosecutors also showed the jury the appointment book with Richard's false name. They showed the guns and the clothing. Richard did not speak much at his trial. He chose to remain silent. The jury had to decide if he was guilty of capital murder. Capital murder means killing more than one person during the same event. The jury found him guilty. Next, the same jury had to decide his punishment. They could give him life in prison or the death penalty. The jury considered the evidence. They saw that Richard shot Catherine Thompson twice at close range. Then he shot Shelley Cutler through a window as she tried to hide. The jury decided that Richard should receive the death penalty. On February 26, 1992, the judge sentenced Richard Dinkins to death. After the sentence, Richard filed appeals. He asked higher courts to review his case. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals affirmed, which means upheld, his conviction and sentence on February 1, 1995. The United States Supreme Court refused to hear his case on October 2, 1995. He also filed a federal habeas petition, which is a request to be released from prison. A federal district court denied it on March 31, 2001. The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals affirmed that denial on March 28, 2002. The U.S. Supreme Court again refused to hear his case on October 7, 2002. On January 29, 2003, Richard Dinkins was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit in Texas. He declined to make a final spoken statement. He wrote a statement instead. He said he was sorry and asked for forgiveness. He was pronounced dead at 6:18 p.m. Catherine Thompson's son, Mike Thompson, said he was pleased that justice was done. Shelley Cutler's parents said they felt the trial was fair and that justice would be served. The two women, a nurse and substance abuse counselor, and a traveling nurse who loved skiing, never returned to their work of helping others. Richard Eugene Dinkins died for the double murder he confessed to committing. Story 7. Granville Riddle was born on June 17, 1969. He grew up in a small town called Stinnett, Texas. Stinnett is a small community in the Texas Panhandle. Not many people lived there. Most people knew each other. Granville had a father. He also had a brother named Levi. He had another family member, or close friend, named Lundy. His family was present in his life. He loved his father and his brother. That was clear from how he spoke about them later. As a young child, Granville seemed like a normal boy. But he started getting into trouble very early. When he was 8 years old, he committed his first burglary. That meant he went into a building that did not belong to him and took things or damaged property. Most children his age did not do such things. But Granville did. As he grew older, the trouble did not stop. He kept breaking into places. When he was a teenager, he committed several burglaries. One of them was the Oakdale Christian Church. That happened in April 1985. He broke into a church and vandalized it. Vandalizing means he damaged property on purpose. In May 1985, he committed 2 more burglaries. First, he broke into a Mexican food restaurant. That restaurant was special because his mother worked there. He still broke into it. Second, he broke into a business called CNA Lawnmower. He took things that did not belong to him. Later in 1985, in October, he stole beer from a grocery store. That is called shoplifting. He took the beer without paying for it. In 1986, in August, he broke into Oakdale Elementary School. That was a school where children went to learn. He had no right to be there. He committed burglary again. He also broke into a flea market. A flea market is a place where people sell used items. He broke into a Baptist church as well. He committed criminal trespass in November 1987. Criminal trespass means he went onto someone's property without permission. In that case, it was a travel trailer. Granville also had problems with drugs. He was arrested for possession of a controlled substance. That means he had illegal drugs. He was also arrested for possession of marijuana. He was arrested for auto theft, which means stealing a car. He was arrested for disorderly conduct, which means behaving in a way that disturbs the peace. He also violated his probation many times. Probation is when a judge lets a person stay out of jail if they follow rules. Granville did not follow the rules. He was arrested for public intoxication, which means being drunk in public. He was arrested again for criminal trespass and for drug possession while on probation. People in Stinnett noticed Granville. He was described as a loner. That means he did not have many friends. He tried to fit in with others. He wanted people to like him, but he never made many close friends. Some people thought he was odd. They said he caused a lot of problems for people in the town. Even before he turned 18, people expected he would end up in serious trouble. In April 1988, Granville was sent to prison. A judge gave him a 7-year sentence for burglary. 7 years is a long time, but Texas had a problem at that time. There was a prison bed shortage. That means there were not enough beds in the prisons for all the inmates. Because of this, many prisoners were released early. Granville served only 2.5 months of his 7-year sentence. Then he was paroled. Parole means he was released early, but had to follow rules. He got out of prison in June 1988. He was 19 years old. After he got out, he tried to live a normal life. He later said he was just a normal small-town boy. He said he liked country and Western music. He liked horses and rodeo. He liked to read books. His favorite writer was Shakespeare. He also liked science fiction and astronomy. He was interested in nature. He was teaching himself German. He said he was caring and considerate. He said he was a nice person, but his record showed a different pattern. He had been a problem for law enforcement since he was very young. The trouble did not stop after he got out of prison. He was on parole. He had rules to follow. But within a few months of his release, something would happen that changed everything. In October 1988, Granville Riddle was 19 years old. He had been out of prison on parole for about 4 months. He was living in or near Amarillo, Texas. He still had a friend named Brad Bybee. Brad Bybee was 18 years old. On the evening of October 9th, 1988, Granville and Brad Bybee went out drinking. They drank alcohol together. At some point, Granville decided to go to the home of a man named Ronnie Hood Bennett. Ronnie Bennett was 39 years old. Granville knew him. Granville later said Ronnie Bennett was a close friend, almost like a stepfather to him. Granville took a tire iron with him. A tire iron is a metal tool used to remove lug nuts from car wheels. It is heavy and strong. Granville had a plan to use this tool to pry open a window if he needed to get inside the house. Granville and Brad Bybee drove to Ronnie Bennett's home in Amarillo. When they arrived, Brad Bybee stayed in the car. He did not go inside at first. Granville went to the house alone. Granville found that a sliding door was unlocked. He entered the house through that sliding door. He did not need to use the tire iron to get in. However, later investigators found that a kitchen window had been pried open. So Granville may have tried to open the window first or pried it after entering. But he got inside through the unlocked door. Once inside, Granville found Ronnie Bennett. Bennett was very drunk. Later, forensic tests showed that Bennett's blood alcohol level was 0.29%. That is more than 3 times the legal driving limit in most states. At that level, a person is extremely intoxicated. Motor functions and sensory functions are totally impaired. Many people would be unconscious at that level. Granville later gave different versions of what happened next. In one version, he said Bennett became angry because Granville had damaged the property by prying the window. Granville said he hit Bennett in the knee with the tire iron to defend himself. Then Bennett got angrier, so Granville hit him on the head. In another version, Granville said Bennett made sexual advances toward him. Granville said Bennett grabbed him, pulled him down, put his lips on Granville's ear, and put a hand on Granville's buttocks. Granville said he refused. Then he hit Bennett with the tire iron. What is known for certain from the evidence is this. Granville Riddle struck Ronnie Bennett on the head with the tire iron at least 15 times. The blows were not light taps. They were heavy, repeated strikes. The tire iron caused blunt force trauma to Bennett's skull. The fatal blow was struck behind the left ear in the mastoid area, and it compressed the spinal cord. That blow killed him. After Bennett was dead, Granville did not stop. He tried to make the home look like it had been burglarized. He moved things around. He wanted it to appear that a stranger had broken in and stolen items. Then he called Brad Bybee to come inside. Brad Bybee entered the house. He saw Ronnie Bennett's body. Granville pointed to some items that were piled on the floor. He told Bybee that those items were theirs to keep. Granville was giving Bybee stolen goods. Then Granville said something to Bybee. He said he wanted to see how strong your stomach is. Bybee understood what that meant. Granville then took the tire iron and hit Ronnie Bennett's head one more time. He swung the tool with force. The tire iron became embedded in Bennett's skull. It stuck there. Bybee watched this happen. Then Bybee secretly left the house. He did not stay with Granville. After Bybee left, Granville panicked. He knew he had killed a man. He decided to take things from the house to make the burglary look real. He grabbed Bennett's wallet. Then he took Bennett's pickup truck. He drove away in the stolen truck. He left the body behind. The next day, October 10th, 1988, the pickup truck was found. It was in a ravine outside of Borger, Texas. Someone had set it on fire. The truck was burned out. Granville had destroyed the vehicle to hide evidence. Granville also had Bennett's wallet. He took money or cards from it. He had committed theft. Because he killed someone during the act of burglary and theft, the crime was capital murder under Texas law. At no point did Granville call for help. He did not report the death. He did not tell anyone except Bybee, who had seen it. Bybee did not report it right away either. Granville simply tried to cover up what he had done. The first person to talk to police was Brad Bybee. Bybee had been with Granville Riddle on the night of the murder. He had watched Granville beat Ronnie Bennett to death. He had seen Granville hit the body one more time with the tire iron. Bybee left the house after that. He did not call police right away. But later, Bybee went to the police. He told them what had happened. He gave them Granville Riddle's name. Because of Bybee's statement, police arrested Bybee first and charged him with murder. Later, those charges were dropped. But Bybee's cooperation helped police find Granville. 5 days after the murder, on October 14th, 1988, police arrested Granville Riddle. He was taken to jail. In November 1988, a grand jury indicted him for capital murder. The charge was capital murder because the killing happened during a burglary and theft. Under Texas law, that type of murder can be punished by death. While Granville was in the Potter County Jail waiting for his trial, he caused many problems. He did not behave like a normal inmate. First, he escaped from jail. He got out of the correctional center through the dining hall. He started what was called a full-scale mutiny among other inmates. He was free for 3 days. During those 3 days, he broke into a trailer home. He stole a .22 caliber rifle, about 100 rounds of ammunition, civilian clothes, and 2 bags of toiletries. He was armed. Police searched for him. They caught him on a highway 20 miles north of Amarillo. He had the rifle and the stolen items with him. He went back to jail. After he was brought back, he tried to escape again. On June 4, 1989, he started digging a hole in the wall of his cell. That attempt failed. On July 14, 1989, he tried again. He climbed into the attic of the facility and hid behind ductwork. A correctional officer found him there. That attempt also failed. In August 1989, Granville tried to electrify his cell door. He used wires from his television and radio. He tampered with them to send electricity to the door. That was another rule violation. He also got into 3 or 4 fights with different inmates while in jail. He talked to himself all night in his cell. He threatened to attack anyone who opened the door. He was a difficult inmate to manage. On November 3, 1989, Granville's trial began in Potter County. The trial was held in the 251st District Court. Judge David L. Gleason presided. The prosecutors presented their case. They called Brad Bybee as a witness. Bybee testified about what he saw. He told the jury that Granville called him into the house, pointed to stolen items, and said he wanted to see how strong Bybee's stomach was. Bybee testified that Granville then hit Bennett's head again and left the tire iron embedded in the skull. The prosecution also called a pathologist named Dr. Ralph Erdman. Dr. Erdman had performed the autopsy on Ronnie Bennett. He testified that Bennett's blood alcohol level was 0.29%, which would have rendered him unconscious. Dr. Erdman also testified that the first blow was to the head, not the knee. He said there were no injuries to Bennett's knee. This was important because Granville claimed he hit the knee first in self-defense. Dr. Erdman's testimony directly contradicted Granville's self-defense claim. Granville testified in his own defense. He told the jury that Bennett made sexual advances. He said he hit Bennett in self-defense. But the physical evidence did not support his story. Bennett was too drunk to grab anyone. The knee had no injuries, and the number of blows was far more than needed to stop an attack. The jury found Granville Riddle guilty of capital murder. The trial then moved to the punishment phase. The jury had to answer special questions. They decided that Granville would be a future danger to society. They decided there were no enough mitigating factors to spare his life. On November 8, 1989, the judge sentenced Granville Riddle to death. After the sentence, Granville began appeals. He appealed directly to the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. On June 8, 1994, that court affirmed his conviction and sentence. He then appealed to the United States Supreme Court. On June 26, 1995, the Supreme Court denied his request to hear the case. He then filed a habeas corpus petition in state court. The Court of Criminal Appeals denied relief on February 26, 1997. He filed a federal habeas petition in the United States District Court for the Northern District of Texas. On July 14, 2000, the District Court denied relief. He appealed to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. On April 15, 2002, the Fifth Circuit affirmed the denial. He asked the U.S. Supreme Court to review again. On October 15, 2002, the Supreme Court denied review. Later, new information came out about Dr. Ralph Erdman. In 1992, Erdman was convicted of falsifying autopsy reports in other homicide cases. He had given false testimony to support prosecutors' theories. He was sent to prison for 13 years. Granville's lawyers tried to use this to challenge his conviction. They argued that Erdman was not credible. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals reviewed this claim. On January 29, 2003, the day before the scheduled execution, the court rejected the claim by a vote of 6-3. They said the evidence against Granville was strong even without Erdman's testimony. While on death row, Granville wrote letters to people. He asked for pen pals. A woman from Switzerland named Mallory Kessler wrote to him. She opposed the death penalty. They continued writing. Eventually they married. Mallory Kessler became Mallory Kessler Riddle. She came to Texas to be with him at the end. Granville Riddle's execution was scheduled for January 30, 2003. He was 33 years old. On that day, he was moved from his holding cell at 6 p.m. He was taken to the death chamber in Huntsville, Texas. He made his final statement. He spoke some words in French to his wife. Then he switched to English. He said he loved his family. He said he had no grudges against anyone. He said he had always been a nice person. He said he had never been mean-hearted or cruel. He wished everybody well. He told his wife, "Je t'aime," one more time. The lethal injection drugs began to flow at 6:08 p.m. He gasped and let out a long breath. At 6:17 p.m., on January 30, 2003, Granville Riddle was pronounced dead. Ronnie Hood Bennett's family did not attend the execution. They had lost their loved one in a brutal beating. Brad Bybee, who helped police, had his charges dropped. Dr. Ralph Erdman served time in prison and was released in 1997. Granville Riddle's wife Mallory was present in the viewing room, sobbing as her husband died. The case was closed. Story 8. John William Elliott was born on March 25, 1960. He was born at Bentwaters Air Force Base in Suffolk, England. His father was an American airman stationed there. His mother was a Hispanic woman from Austin, Texas. John was given the nickname Jackie by his family. John's parents were both American citizens. Because he was born on a United States military base in England, John also had British citizenship. He held citizenship in both countries from birth. When John was 6 months old, his family left England. They moved to the United States. They first settled in Rhode Island. John's father was still in the military. The family had 5 children. Money was tight. John's parents struggled to pay for everything they needed. Not long after moving to Rhode Island, John's parents began having problems in their marriage. They argued often. The stress of raising 5 children with little money made things worse. Eventually, John's parents separated. His mother decided to leave Rhode Island. She took her children and moved to Texas. John was still very young at this time. He saw his father only once after 1964. That one visit happened many years later, when John was already in prison. John's mother brought the children to Austin, Texas. She tried to build a new life for them. But life in Austin was not easy. The family faced harassment from people in the local community. The children were taunted at school and in the neighborhood. People made fun of them because of their mixed-race background. John's mother was Hispanic. His father was white. This made John and his siblings targets for cruel words and actions. The family had very little money. They survived on welfare for most of John's childhood. His father did not send any money to help. John's mother was dedicated to her children. She worked hard to care for them, but she was often overwhelmed. She had 5 children to feed and clothe with very few resources. At some point, John's mother decided to go back to school. She wanted to get qualifications. She hoped this would help her find a better job. She wanted to support her family more effectively. While she was in school, John was often left in the care of his older brother. There was not always an adult watching over him. The family lived in the Santa Rita Cruz housing project in East Austin. This area was known for drugs and violence. It was a frightening place for a child. John later described it as a nightmarish environment. He felt like an outsider. He was drawn to a negative group of peers because he needed protection. He believed that being part of that group would keep him safe in a dangerous neighborhood. John did not do well in school. He struggled to keep up with his classes. He was expelled from school in the 9th grade. He did not complete his high school education. After his expulsion, his mother tried to straighten him out. She sent him to a boys' farm in Laredo, Texas. This was a facility meant to help troubled boys change their behavior. As a young man, John met a woman. They started a relationship. They had 2 children together. John's girlfriend was pregnant with their 2nd child at the time of his later arrest. That 2nd child was a daughter. John never got to hold that daughter. She was born while he was in custody. John found work as a framer in the building trade. This was during a time of economic growth in Austin in the 1980s. He worked full-time. He was a generous father. He cared deeply about his children. He tried to provide for them. But the economic boom did not last. When the economy slowed down, John lost his full-time work. He searched desperately for ways to help his family. He worked part-time whenever he could find it, but the financial security he had enjoyed was gone. His marriage fell apart under the stress. John started drinking alcohol heavily. He also started using hard drugs. He became addicted to amphetamines. He used alcohol and drugs as a way to escape his problems. John had already been in trouble with the law before his addiction grew worse. In 1982, he was convicted of intentional murder. The case involved a bar fight. A group of men, including John, fired a gun at a man outside a nightclub. The man was killed. John pleaded guilty to intentional murder. He was sentenced to 8 years in prison, but Texas prisons were overcrowded at that time. Because of the space shortage, John was released under mandatory supervision after serving only 4 months of his 8-year sentence. In 1984, John was convicted again. This time the charge was attempted burglary of a habitation. He received a sentence of 10 years of probation. He also had other minor convictions on his record. These included public intoxication, disorderly conduct, and illegal possession of weapons. By the middle of the 1980s, John William Elliott was a man in his mid-20s. He had a criminal record that included a murder conviction. He had served almost no time for that killing. He was addicted to drugs and alcohol. His relationship had ended. He was struggling to find steady work. He spent time in East Austin, in the neighborhoods he had known since childhood. He still associated with some of the people he had grown up with in the housing projects. On a Friday evening in June 1986, John was hanging out with some friends in a driveway on Gonzales Street in East Austin. They were drinking beer. None of them knew that the events of that night would change all of their lives forever. The evening of Friday, June 13th, 1986, started like many others for John Elliott. He was with 2 friends, Ricky Elizondo and Robert Hansen. The summary also mentions a 4th man named Pete Ramirez. They were hanging out in the driveway of Ricky Elizondo's house at 2808 Gonzales Street in East Austin, Texas. They were drinking beer from a pickup truck parked in the driveway. Around 6:30 p.m., a young woman named Joyce Mungia was walking to a bus stop. She was 18 years old. She had a 1-year-old toddler at home. She was on her way somewhere when Robert Hansen saw her. Hansen knew Joyce from the neighborhood. He called out to her. He invited her to come over and join the group of men who were drinking. Joyce agreed. She walked over to the driveway. She joined John Elliott, Ricky Elizondo, Robert Hansen, and Pete Ramirez. Over the next several hours, the group shared alcohol together. They drank beer. They also drank a strong grain alcohol called Everclear. Joyce took a big drink from the shared bottle. At some point, they also used cocaine. Joyce ingested some cocaine as well. Joyce was upset that night. She told the men that her boyfriend was seeing his ex-wife again behind her back. The men talked with her. Robert Hansen tried to console her in the backyard. Later, Ricky Elizondo asked Joyce if she wanted to wash her face inside the house. She went inside with him. Soon after, John Elliott and Pete Ramirez also went inside. Robert Hansen followed close behind. When they got inside, they found that the bathroom door was locked. The men looked through the bathroom window. From outside, John Elliott and Hansen could see Elizondo kissing Joyce inside the bathroom. Someone got a wire coat hanger. John Elliott used it to open the locked bathroom door. When the door opened, Hansen saw Joyce on her knees in front of Elizondo. Elizondo was zipping his pants up. Hansen believed that Elizondo and Joyce had been engaged in oral sex. Hansen later said he thought maybe Elizondo tried to get Joyce to do something she did not want to do. After this, all the men went back outside. Joyce came out a short time later. She asked Robert Hansen to walk her home. Hansen could tell that Joyce was very drunk. He later described that she was crying. Her words were slurred and hard to understand. She was walking like she could not walk very well. She needed help. Hansen agreed to walk Joyce home. He started walking with her, but John Elliott followed them. Elliott intercepted them on the path. Hansen tried to keep walking with Joyce. Elliott told Hansen he would hurt him. Elliott said he would kick Hansen's ass or hit him. Then Elliott took Joyce from Hansen. He carried her into a dark, wooded area under the 7th Street Railroad Bridge. This was near the house. Joyce was crying. She was asking Hansen to help her. She was asking Hansen to take her home. But Elliott carried her into the dark area under the bridge. He laid her down on her back in the grass. He began to remove her shorts and her panties. Joyce told Elliott to stop. She told him to leave her alone. She kept yelling Hansen's name. She begged Hansen to help her and get her out of there. Then Ricky Elizondo and Pete Ramirez arrived at the bridge area. They followed Elliott there. John Elliott then had sex with Joyce. After Elliott finished, Pete Ramirez had sex with her. After Ramirez finished, Ricky Elizondo had sex with her. Throughout this time, Joyce kept calling out for Hansen to help her. She did not consent to these acts. The men did not have her permission. Robert Hansen watched all of this happen. He did not stop it. Later, Elizondo testified that Joyce began to ask for her clothes. She wanted to get dressed and leave. Elizondo stopped what he was doing. But then Joyce announced something. She said that when the men were done with her, she was going straight to the police. She said she would report what they had done. John Elliott heard this. He told Elizondo that they were going to have to kill Joyce. He also said they would have to kill Robert Hansen because Hansen had not taken part in raping Joyce and might talk. Elliott told Elizondo to keep Joyce under the bridge. Elliott said he was going to get a gun. He left the area and went back to Elizondo's house. But Elliott did not get a gun. Instead, he went inside Elizondo's house and found something else. Ricky Elizondo wore a belt made from a chrome-plated motorcycle chain. Elliott took that chain. He returned to the area under the bridge. When Elliott came back, Joyce was standing up. She was looking for her clothes. She wanted to leave. Elliott took the motorcycle chain. He struck Joyce with it. The blow hit her head. She fell to the ground. Then Elliott struck her again. And again. He hit her multiple times with the metal chain. Elizondo later testified that he saw Elliott hit Joyce 3 more times while she lay on the ground. The chain was used to beat her on the head and on the face. The total number of blows was later counted by a medical examiner. Joyce Munguia had been hit 16 times on the head and 8 times on the face. That was 24 separate strikes from the metal chain. Fragments of metal from the chain were later recovered from her head. Ricky Elizondo ran away while Elliott was beating Joyce. Elizondo went back to his house. He washed his clothes. Then he went to sleep. Robert Hansen also left the scene. He went to call his sister. He told her what had happened. His sister then called the police. But at that moment, Joyce Munguia was already dead or dying under the bridge. John Elliott left Joyce's body where it lay under the 7th Street Bridge. The chain he had used was covered in blood. His clothes were covered in blood. His shorts and his shoes were heavily splattered with Joyce's blood. He went home. Later that night, a medical examination would show that Joyce had a blood alcohol level of 0.20. That is 4 times the legal limit for driving in Texas. Traces of cocaine were found in her nasal cavity. The sex she had been forced to endure left fluids in her body from multiple men. But that evidence would be collected later. For now, under a bridge in East Austin, a young mother lay dead. She had been beaten to death with a motorcycle chain. Her name was Joyce Mungia. She was 19 years old at the time of her death. She had a 1-year-old child who would never see her again. The first person to contact the police was Daniel Hansen's sister. Hansen had run from the bridge area after witnessing the beating. He called his sister and told her what happened. She then called the Austin police. Officers were dispatched to the scene under the 7th Street Bridge. Police arrived at the crime scene between 1 a.m. and 1:30 a.m. on June 14, 1986. They found the body of Joyce Mungia. She was lying in the wooded area under the bridge. Her head and face were covered in blood. She had clear signs of severe blunt force trauma. Officers secured the area and called for homicide detectives. The police began their investigation immediately. They collected evidence from the scene. They took photographs. They measured shoe prints found in the dirt and grass around Joyce's body. They also collected metal fragments from her head wounds. Those fragments would later be matched to a motorcycle chain. Officers also collected a sexual assault evidence kit, often called a rape kit. This kit contained fluids taken from Joyce's body. Those fluids would later be tested for blood type and DNA. The kit showed that multiple men had sex with Joyce shortly before her death. Police did not have to search far for suspects. Hansen had already given them names. The officers went to Ricky Elizondo's house on Gonzales Street. They also went to John Elliott's home. They arrived at Elliott's house in the early morning hours of June 14th. When police knocked on Elliott's door, he answered. Officers looked at his clothing. His blue jean shorts were splattered with blood. His shoes also had blood on them. The blood was still visible. Officers asked Elliott about the blood. He did not give a clear explanation. He was calm. He did not act surprised or upset. He did not say, "I didn't do it," with any emotion. He knew his rights. He had been through the criminal justice system before. He chose to say very little. Police arrested John Elliott that morning. They also arrested Ricky Elizondo and Pete Ramirez. Robert Hansen was not arrested. He had cooperated with police from the start. He gave a full statement about what he had witnessed. The police sent Elliott's clothing to a crime lab for testing. The blood on his shorts and shoes was tested. The results showed that the blood matched Joyce Mungia's blood type. The police also took casts and photographs of the shoe prints found at the crime scene. They compared those prints to Elliott's shoes. The prints matched. They did not match the shoes of Elizondo or Ramirez. The murder weapon was a chrome-plated motorcycle chain. Ricky Elizondo told police that the chain belonged to him. He normally wore it as a belt. He said Elliott had taken it from his house on the night of the murder. Metal fragments recovered from Joyce's head were examined. They matched the composition of that chain. The sexual assault evidence was also analyzed. The fluids found in Joyce's body had blood types that matched John Elliott, Pete Ramirez, and Robert Hansen. Later, when DNA testing became available, further tests were done. Those tests showed that Elliott could not be excluded as the man who left sperm in the victim's body. The DNA tests excluded 99.99% of the population. Elliott was not part of that excluded group. On July 30th, 1986, the state of Texas indicted John William Elliott for capital murder. The charge was murder committed during the course of an aggravated sexual assault. Under Texas law, this crime carries the death penalty or life in prison. Elliott pleaded not guilty. The trial took place in the 299th Judicial District Court of Travis County, Texas. Judge John Wisser presided over the case. The trial began in January 1987. The prosecution presented its evidence over several days. Two key witnesses testified for the state. The first was Robert Hansen. He told the jury everything he had seen. He described how he tried to walk Joyce home. He described how Elliot took her to the bridge. He described how Elliot, Elizondo, and Ramirez each had sex with her while she cried and asked for help. He described hearing Joyce say she would go to the police. He described Elliot leaving and returning with a chain. He described Elliot beating Joyce with that chain. The second key witness was Ricky Elizondo. He had been charged with capital murder as well. He made a deal with prosecutors. He agreed to plead guilty to a lesser charge of aggravated sexual assault. He also agreed to testify truthfully against Elliot. In exchange, he would receive a sentence of 10 years in prison instead of the death penalty. Elizondo testified that he saw Elliot borrow the chain and then beat Joyce to death. Pete Ramirez did not testify at Elliot's trial. He had also made a plea agreement. He pleaded guilty to sexual assault and received a 15-year prison sentence. Robert Hansen was never charged with any crime related to Joyce's death. The prosecution also presented physical evidence. The blood on Elliot's shorts and shoes was shown to the jury. The matching shoe prints were presented. The metal fragments from Joyce's head were shown. A police sergeant named Dusty Heskew testified as an expert on blood spatter. He told the jury that the pattern of blood on Elliot's clothing was consistent with him swinging the chain with his right hand. Elliot's defense lawyers argued that the sex was consensual. They argued that Elliot did not kill Joyce. They pointed to Elizondo as a possible killer. But the lawyers had never handled a capital murder case before. They had little experience with this type of trial. The jury was shown Elliot's prior criminal record. They learned that he had been convicted of intentional murder in 1982. They learned about his attempted burglary conviction in 1984. On January 12, 1987, the jury returned a verdict. They found John William Elliot guilty of capital murder. The trial then moved to the punishment phase. The jury had to answer 3 special questions. Those questions decided whether Elliot would receive death or life in prison. The jury answered yes to all 3 questions. On January 15, 1987, the trial court signed the judgment. Elliot was sentenced to death by lethal injection. Elliot appealed his conviction. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals affirmed the conviction and death sentence on April 14, 1993. The United States Supreme Court declined to review the case. Elliot then filed state and federal habeas corpus petitions. All were denied. In 2002, a new execution date was set for February 4, 2003. In the years between his conviction and his execution date, Elliot maintained his innocence. He said he did not rape Joyce, and he did not kill her. He said his criminal past made it easy for prosecutors to convict him. He regretted not living a different life. On death row, he studied and passed his high school exams. He became a devout Christian. He overcame his drug and alcohol addictions. In the weeks before his execution, Elliot's lawyers tried new legal strategies. They asked a court to allow DNA testing on blood found on Robert Hansen's shoes. Hansen had said the blood was from an old stab wound. The lawyers wanted to see if the blood was actually Joyce's. They also wanted to test semen samples for DNA from all the men. The court denied the request. A judge ruled that the testing did not directly relate to Elliot's guilt or innocence. Elliot's lawyers also pointed to inconsistencies in the testimony of Elizondo and Hansen. They presented a new statement from Pete Ramirez. Ramirez now said that Joyce had consensual sex with Elliot and Ramirez before she was killed. He claimed that Elizondo had attacked Joyce in the bathroom earlier. He suggested that Elizondo had a motive to kill Joyce because she refused to have more sex with him. But none of this evidence was enough to stop the execution. On February 4th, 2003, John William Elliott was scheduled to die. He was held in the death row unit at Polunsky, then moved to the execution chamber in Huntsville, Texas. His execution was delayed by nearly an hour because the U.S. Supreme Court was considering his final appeals. The court rejected all of them. The Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles also rejected his requests for clemency. The vote was 18-0 against him. Elliott was asked if he had a final statement. He said nothing. He was strapped to the execution gurney at 6:55 p.m. The lethal chemicals were injected. At 7:02 p.m., he was pronounced dead. He was 42 years old. For his last meal, Elliott requested 1 cup of hot tea made from tea bags and 6 chocolate chip cookies. The 2 accomplices served their sentences. Ricky Elizondo was paroled after serving part of his 10-year sentence for sexual assault. Pete Ramirez was paroled in 1990 after serving part of his 15-year sentence. Robert Hansen was never prosecuted. Joyce Mungia's family watched the case closely. Her sister Lillian said the family would fight for justice because Joyce could not fight for herself. They believed the execution was justice for what had been done to their sister and daughter, a young mother who never got to see her child grow up. The final sentence: John William Elliott was executed by lethal injection on February 4th, 2003, for the rape and beating death of Joyce Mungia.